Aloha, everybody. Marc Dixon here, your local Allstate agent right here in Hawaii. And today I'm going to talk about something that confuses a lot of homeowners. Right? Your house can actually have three completely different values. Now, you might have a home that's worth, let's say, $1.2 million on the real estate market, but has a $750,000 property tax assessment and has a $900,000 reconstruction cost for insurance. And you might be thinking, hey, Marc, somebody's math is really bad. But actually, the math might be perfectly correct because we are talking about three completely different numbers that answer three completely different questions. So let's make insurance simple. Number one, reconstruction value. So let's start with the number that matters the most for your homeowner's insurance. That is your reconstruction value. Now, this is essentially asking if something catastrophic happened and we had to rebuild my house today, what would it cost in today's dollars? So we're talking about the cost of construction, materials, labor, permits, debris removal, and all the other expenses associated with rebuilding the structure. And this is where Hawaii can get interesting because if you priced the contractor lately, you already know that we don't exactly have Home Depot prices for everything. We live on an island. A lot of materials have to be shipped here or flown here. Labor costs can be different. Construction costs can be significantly different from what you might see on the US mainland. And that's why your insurance company uses a reconstruction cost calculation to help determine your dwelling coverage. The goal is to insure the house itself for an appropriate amount, not to insure it for whatever's on Zillow or your tax bill or what your neighbor says it's worth. Number two, real estate market value. So let's talk about market value as far as real estate. Now, that's basically what could I potentially sell this property for today? And that's completely different. Market value includes things like the house, the land, the neighborhood, the location, the schools, the view, the size of the lot, supply and demand, and essentially what buyers are willing to pay. And here in Hawaii, location can be everything. You could have two houses that are almost identical, but one is 5 minutes from the beach, and the other is, well, 5 minutes farther from the beach. I mean, suddenly they're not worth the same amount. And if you have a beautiful ocean view, congratulations. But you may be paying for that view every time you look at your property tax bill and every time somebody tells you what your house is worth. But here's the really important part. The cost to rebuild your house does not necessarily increase just because the land underneath is valuable. If your property is worth 1.5 mil, the land might be worth 800,000 and you don't insure the land for 800,000. Why? Because if your house burns down, the land doesn't burn down. At least I hope not. So we've got enough problems in Hawaii without having to worry about that. Right, number three, property tax value. Now let's talk about the number that really gets people confused, property tax value. Now, your property tax assessment is used by the government to calculate your property taxes. And here on Oahu, the City and County of Honolulu's Real Property Assessment Division determines the values and applies the appropriate classification and tax rates. But here's the most important thing. Your property tax value is not your insurance reconstruction cost and is not necessarily the same thing as what you could sell your house for. The county is using its own valuation and taxation methodology. So say that you look at your tax assessment and it says 700,000 and you think, great, that's what my house is worth. Well, not necessarily. And then you look at your homeowner's policy and you see 950,000 of dwelling coverage and you think, wait a minute, why am I insuring my house for 950,000 when the city and county says it's only worth 700,000? That's because you're comparing apples to oranges. So let's take a look at a realistic Hawaii example. Let's say you own a house here on Oahu. You might have a property tax assessment value of 750,000, estimated reconstruction costs of 950,000, and a real estate market value of 1.4 million. Now, at first glance, those numbers look crazy, but they're actually telling us three different stories. The 750,000 is being used for property taxation. The 1.4 mil reflects what the entire property, including the land, might command in the real estate market, and the 950K is what it would estimate was the estimate to rebuild the house. Three numbers, three purposes, one property. So which number should you use for your insurance? Right? This is the big question when we're talking about your dwelling coverage. We're primarily dealing with what would it cost to rebuild the structure? Not what did you just pay for the house, not what does Zillow say the house is worth, and definitely not what does your tax assessor say. It's also one more thing. What your neighbor thinks doesn't count, so don't say what he thinks. So we're looking at the characteristics of your home and the current cost of construction, and that's why it's important to review your dwelling coverage periodically. Because construction costs change, labor costs change, material costs change, and your house may change. Right? Maybe you remodel the kitchen, added a bathroom, finished an area of the house that wasn't finished before, added improvements, added PV, or made some other significant changes. Your insurance coverage should be reviewed when those things happen. So here's a simple way to remember it. If you're trying to remember the difference between these three values, think about these three questions. Market value asks, what could I sell this entire property for? Property tax value asks, what value is being used to calculate my property taxes? And reconstruction value asks, what would it cost to completely rebuild my house? Those are three completely different questions, which means three completely different answers. All right, so if you look at your homeowner's policy and see a dwelling limit that's different from your property's market value or tax assessment, don't automatically assume something's wrong. Right? In fact, it's completely normal for those numbers to be significantly different. The most important question is, does my insurance value match my home's market value? The important question is, do I have an appropriate amount of dwelling coverage to completely rebuild my home after a covered loss? And that's something we can help you review. All right, I'm Marc Dixon, your local Allstate agent here in Hawaii. So if you haven't reviewed your homeowner's insurance recently, whether you're with us or not, give us a call, because the worst time to discover you don't have enough coverage is after something happens. So that's insurance made simple. Aloha, stay safe, live aloha, and have a mayhem-free day. And I'll see you next week.